The Construction Association of Michigan, CAM, has been helping commercial and industrial contractors and suppliers grow since 1885. Now's the time to join. Visit buildwithcam.com. If you're a construction company looking to grow, CAM offers resources to help you build your staff, find more projects, and expand your network. Join today. The Construction Association of Michigan. They're one industry, one resource, one CAM. Join today at buildwithcam.com.
Today's episode of CAM's Building Michigan podcast is sponsored by Priority Health, endorsed health insurance carrier for CAM members.
So right now, we've all been feeling lots of shifts in our lives. We've gone from crazy busy schedules to way more time with our loved ones, from commuting to the office to working from our couches. And that's okay, because Priority Health is always ready to shift right there with you. So whether you're experiencing a shift in employment or you're prepping for a new member of the family to arrive, Priority Health has you covered. Priorities shift, so maybe it's time your health insurance company did too. Find your plan at PriorityHealth.com.
It's that time of year. Time to review your workers' compensation plan and shift to coverage that pays you back. CAMCOMP, part of the Construction Association of Michigan, is the state's leading self-insured group designed for the construction industry. The safer your employees, the more money you get back. The average payback to members is 45% of their premium, a very smart investment.
Find out how safety pays. For more information, please contact Michelle Mage at mmage@camcomp.net.
Hello, and welcome to our 15th episode of the Building Michigan podcast, produced for Michigan's construction industry by the Construction Association of Michigan, CAM. My name is Kevin Koehler. I'm the president of CAM and your host for Building Michigan. Our podcast is designed for the construction industry here in the Great Lakes state. Each 25 to 30-minute episode will feature conversations on industry topics, including a variety of conversation with industry leaders discussing construction projects, trends, business development, workforce safety, legislation, and other industry-related topics. Okay, so let's get started. This is Season 2, Episode 15, and we're super excited today for our episode, which is featuring a conversation with Brian Van Riper, Managing Director at MassMutual Great Lakes in Southfield and Grand Rapids. Brian, welcome to Building Michigan's podcast.
Kevin, thanks for having me.
All right, before we get started, Brian, I'd like to just give the listeners a little background on you, who you are, maybe a little bit about MassMutual, then we can kind of get into the actual conversation. So, Brian, I know you've been in the business for over 30 years in financial services marketplace. You're dedicated to helping clients achieve their financial goals, and you're managing director at MassMutual Great Lakes, located both in Southfield, Michigan, and in Grand Rapids, Michigan. So, Brian, why don't you give us a little background on how you ended up at MassMutual Great Lakes, and then we can talk a little bit about what MassMutual does.
Okay. I started out my career at Ford Motor Company in operations management, and after about 4.5 years of that, Kevin, I decided I wanted to get into a business where I could own it and control it myself. And the financial services was the industry that I chose, and started out with New England Mutual Life Insurance Company out of Boston to do financial planning, whatever financial planning meant back in the 1980s. Because back then you had insurance companies on one side of the street, wirehouses on the other, and by the end of that decade they had become all things to all people. Mm-hmm. The guy that I was most interested in was a guy by the name of Lyle Wilson, who was the general agent. And what was unique about Lyle was he had developed a relationship with Comerica Bank when he was in Boston to do benefits consulting. Now, Comerica Bank was small at the time, and between Comerica and Flex and a business that Lyle developed called Flex Ben Corporation, they put the first flexible benefit plan in place in the United States. And Lyle had his son David Wilson come back and run the business, who was a speechwriter for President Reagan. So David was a political wonk, and by the end of that decade, by the end of the 1980s, David became the executive vice chair for the Employers Council on Flexible Compensation. The ECFC is recognized as the chief lobbying organization to the federal legislature for healthcare reform.
So it was Wilson Partners.
Wilson Partners, okay, yep. So right. They're in my little bio.
Mm-hmm.
And David also, if we move it a little bit closer to today, was part of President Trump's original transition team to either replace or amend the Affordable Care Act, or commonly referred to as Obamacare. So I joined that agency, his father's agency, in 1986, 37 years ago, to get into what I thought was financial planning, and I did a lot of insurance, life insurance and investment work. I then got into what's called business succession planning, which is the transfer of a privately held party from one party to another. I got into estate planning, which is the transfer of wealth. And back then, the unified credit was set at $600,000 or $1.2 million per person. Today, it's almost $25 million. Then I got into the employee benefits space, where I called in companies from 100 to 5,000 employees to do health and welfare, qualified and non-qualified executive comp, and voluntary benefits. And now today, I joined MassMutual back in 2012 to kind of head up an advanced planning team and also become one of their managing directors.
So you certainly have a vast amount of knowledge in that space, I guess, and all things retirement or insurance. So tell me a little bit about MassMutual. What exactly does MassMutual do? I know you guys are CAM members and that you've put a program together for our membership for LTC, LTD, and life insurance, kind of an employee benefit program that we'll talk about later. But tell us a little bit about MassMutual.
Well, I'm going to separate MassMutual, the company, from MassMutual Great Lakes, which is one of its 63 operating units across the country. So MassMutual has about $1 trillion of assets under management. And so MassMutual, the company, designs, develops, and distributes certain products under their own nameplate. Best way I can describe it in our podcast is to give you a visual picture of a three-legged stool. One leg would represent what happens if I die too early. The second leg would represent what happens if I become incapacitated. Will I become financially dependent on others? Or what happens if I live too long? Will I run out of money? So the first arm of MassMutual's business is their proprietary life insurance, disability insurance, long-term care insurance, and a whole suite of annuities. And of those products, the two that are probably misunderstood the most are life insurance as a financial tool, and also annuities. Annuities are really designed for transfer of risk from the individual to a larger pooling arrangement, so that I don't have to take on a ton of risk when I get to be a little bit older. So that's one leg of their business. And there's Melissa, which is the broker-dealer, where we sell stocks, bonds, mutual funds, limited partnerships, managed accounts, institutional accounts, etc. We also have Malia, which is MassMutual Life Insurance Affiliation. I can represent, so we're not captive, I can represent probably 80 to 100 different companies. We have a retirement services companies that we can use to help small privately held businesses, public institutions, as well as large privately or publicly traded companies put together retirement plans.
So does that mean you are not tied exclusively to the MassMutual product? You can represent that, but you can represent other
That's correct.
products out there. Okay, so there's the three legs of the stool.
Yep.
Interesting. So let's talk a little bit about business succession planning. Sure. Every business owner, every business needs to think about it, and I don't know that they do enough until it's maybe too late or they're scrambling to get something done. But why is business succession so important to the long-term viability of a business?
Well, what I would say about business succession is really just thinking about, let me start by saying there's three things that I've found over my period of time in the industry that business owners have in common. Number one, they generally invest in themselves. They don't invest in publicly traded America. The only time they buy publicly traded stocks are usually because they've set up a 401k plan and they participate in it, or somebody tells them about a great deal, so they're gambling in the market. Otherwise, they're going to invest in themselves. The second thing is they have access, they either have large sums of cash or access to cash to meet payroll, or to look for other business opportunities. And getting into your specific question is the third thing, which is they have no idea generally how they're going to exit. They've built this enterprise, this asset over time, which is the largest asset inside their estate, and they generally don't have any idea how they're going to maximize the value and minimize the taxes when they want to start to exit. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And I think, construction business owners are running and keeping their companies going, especially the small to mid-sized guys. They're dealing with the everyday issues of keeping the business, rocking and rolling. And sometimes they forget about what happens in 10 years or 15 years or 5 years when they're ready to maybe step aside or slow down, whether they're handing it off to a family member or another employee or just selling it outright. So I think as far as succession planning goes, it's important for our businesses, our members, to think about that, because inevitably it's going to happen, right?
At some point.
Yeah.
That's right. So I would tell I think the factor that makes the most sense is helping owners of business understand that they have two choices. They can either work for the business or they can let the business work for them. So what are the mechanisms that the owner of the business can use to get money out of the business, jump the income tax fence, and protect it from creditors? Well, qualified retirement plans are one of those mechanisms, because the IRS and the Department of Labor have what are called ERISA rules, right? Well, that just simply means that under ERISA, a creditor of a business can't come after that asset because it's protected at the federal level. The same thing can be true for life insurance, whether they're cash values or death benefits. As long as the owner is named a family member as the primary beneficiary, generally speaking, that asset is protected from creditors at the state level through the Widows and Orphans laws of the state of Michigan. So part of it is just understanding, how do I use this business to create personal wealth, and how do I mitigate my risk once I get it outside the business and into my personal estate?
It's interesting because in our last episode we talked to some guys from Lazier Capital that specialize in ESOPs, which is a business transference tool. It's one of the arrows in your quiver of potential things, and it sounds like life insurance is one that can be utilized, and some other qualified programs that you're discussing. So give me an example of the advantage of a value. How do you get a value for your business? How does a contractor go about doing that? And then how do you, when you sit down with them, utilize that to help them build a succession plan that works for them?
Well, I usually start the conversation out, Kevin, by saying, at one end of the spectrum, what would you sell your business for? And let's say I'm going to sell it for $5 million. Okay. At the other end of the spectrum, what would you buy it for? Well, then they say, I'm going to buy it for $1 million. I'm a good business person. I'm going to try and buy it at a discount. So part of it, what they're telling me is that value is probably somewhere between $1 million and $5 million. The reason that you might want to get a valuation on your business done by and certified by a local CPA firm is that at your death, the IRS, if you have a certified valuation and it's reasonable, they'll usually use that for the value of the business. If not, the IRS is going to do their own audit, and they're going to come up with what the value of the business is, especially if that asset has gone into the probate court system.
Sure.
Because they're going to want to find out are there any levels of tax due? Are there any capital gains tax due on the death? Are there any estate taxes due on the death? And then the state is going to have its own reasons, right? We used to have state inheritance tax, which we don't, but there may be some state income tax and that type of stuff.
Brian, when you're talking with business owners, what are the characteristics of the business owners that you come across? I mean, is there any commonality? Is there any specific characteristics that business owners possess?
Well, I think I had mentioned earlier, I think there's three things that they have in common. They're generally investing in themselves and not other people. Mm-hmm. They usually have access to cash. And I bring up the cash because a lot of times when they transfer it at death to somebody else, right? Mm-hmm. It could be a surviving spouse, it could be children, it could be somebody else. A lot of times those people lack liquidity to run the business, which destroys the business. Meaning that owner usually is the one that has all the lines of credit if they're not using their own cash. And then depending on how they've titled their assets, that business might not have access to the money needed to continue to run it. So I think when I start to talk about businesses, what do they want to do? Do they want it to continue into the future? Do they want their name out, in the marketplace for the next 100 years? Mm-hmm. How do I do that? And that's really succession.
So when a contractor or a business owner calls you, you sit down with them. I'm sure you have a process you go through, maybe kind of a checklist to see what it is they're looking for, what it is they need, and then you bring in the experts, or you have the experts at MassMutual Great Lakes that can come in and work with you to build a solid succession plan for the business.
That's correct. So I think what it starts out with, most people for an estate plan have a will and trust, and then they have assets, right? Will and trust is all about the intent of the deceit and then titling assets so that you skirt the probate process. In a business, you have what's called a buy-sell agreement. The buy-sell agreement is whether there's one stockholder or multiple stockholders. It's just kind of rules of engagement. What happens if somebody dies? What happens if somebody becomes disabled? What happens if somebody wants an early buyout? What happens when I retire? And then they might even have ethics clauses. In a lot of these businesses, what happens if people have bad habits? They drink too much. They do drugs. They womanize.
Why are you looking at me when you say that? Well, geez, no. So that's a very valid question, but that's for partnerships, right? When you have more than one owner, like if you're the sole owner of the company. Let's say I'm a mechanical guy and I own the company myself. I've got 15 employees. I mean, I have a whole different. I'm the stockholder. I'm the sole stockholder, so to speak. I'm the guy. So I need to think about what I can do for transference. Whether I'm transferring it to my guys or a family member or what that may be. But it's a little different than having a solid buy-sell agreement if you have a partnership, which I completely understand you need. So that there's a tool that the owners can follow to execute that buy-sell, right?
Yeah, I think there's two things, and I'm glad you brought that up. One is guidance, which is that buy-sell agreement. The other are the tools to provide the mechanism for liquidity. Let's take, for example, that I have a sole stockholder. And let's say it's stock in the sense that it's either a C or an S election, right? Because with an LLC, I have a membership certificate.
Okay.
Right? So the question I usually ask these folks is, number one, do they have a will and trust? And then number two, I'll ask them, who owns the company? And the person that has the 100% ownership looks at me and they go, that's kind of a silly question. I said, well, could you give me the answer? They go, I do. And I said, you own 100% of the stock, and let's say it's a C corporation, which has a separate, it's a separate tax entity. And then my question would be, what does it say in your stock certificate? And they'll say, what do you mean? I say, who owns it on the stock certificate? I just told you, I did. So if you died yesterday, who owns it? He goes, well, I do. I said, no, you died yesterday. Who owns it? He goes, well, I'm assuming my wife does. I said, technically the state of Michigan does through the probate court.
And you know what happens, and I speaking from experience, I had an uncle who recently passed away who owned a gas station in Ann Arbor as a C Corp.
Yeah.
And he was a sole stockholder, so we actually had to go through probate, get someone appointed as the new CEO of the company to be able to execute the sale of the station.
That's right.
So that I can tell you, I can attest to that firsthand, that it's extremely important that business owners think about those kinds of things. And they're so busy running their businesses, I just don't think they do. They do what they have to do, or their attorney helps them set up the C Corp, and maybe they don't think about those things. So
well,
that's if you don't take anything else out of this conversation, that's something that sole proprietorships need to think about, especially if they're set up as a C Corp. What happens with that stock, sir? Yeah.
Well, I think the three things you need to know about probate, and none of them are good for a person that owns a business because they're probably highly illiquid, is number one, there's the cost of delay and publicity. Number one, the cost is they're going to charge you 5 to 10% of your estate value because they're going to hire an attorney to look at documents. They're going to hire an accountant to do the tax work, find out what taxes might be due. And number three, since this is a hard asset, they're going to bring an appraiser out. Well, if somebody in your family or somebody in the general public doesn't like the appraisal, they might ask for a 2 out of 3.
Mm-hmm.
On top of that, it's going to probably take anywhere from 6 months or greater. Unless it's a second death, then it'll be 2 years or greater. But people the judge listens to disputes. And the third thing,
And by the way, when the judge is listening, your bank's going too. You're still paying, the estate's paying for that too. So.
And the judge decides when you're going to meet with them, and you can't do anything with the business until then. And the third thing's probably worse. These are privately held businesses, and I'm going to underscore privately held. Well, they become very public in probate court because generally a week before they sit in front of that judge, it's posted in the legal news, and anybody can go to one of these hearings. So all of a sudden now you introduce fictitious creditors and predators, but you also have your competition there. So they're going to lay out the value of the business, and now your surviving spouse, who doesn't necessarily know the value of the business, understand the business maybe a little bit, but they're not in it day to day. Now you got a competitor out there who's probably a shrewd business person. Now you might start getting 50, 60 cents on the dollar.
So, Brian, what is the magic bullet here? How do you avoid that? Proper,
I would tell you
proper pre-planning, right?
Yeah,
proper
planning.
succession
I think
planning.
it comes down to two things: the documents necessary to let the court know if you're going to go the probate route. Now, I would tell every business owner the way you can save hundreds, thousands, or millions is naming on your stock certificate. If I have a will and a trust, that stock certificate should read Brian Van Riper trustee for the Brian Van Riper trust dated boom, boom, boom. Today's May 10th of 2023. And if that's the day the trust was dated, I just want to put that down. Now it's held in trust, and all the probate court judge is going to look at are those documents authentic, and were they done under duress? Otherwise, they're going to pass it on to the new fiduciary, which is generally the trustee. So I'm going to be the trustee during my lifetime, but at my death, it's going to hand over to a successor trustee.
Right.
And then the other piece of that are really the financial mechanisms to do that. The single best product for the transition of ownership at death is life insurance. It provides a tax-free liquidity of that business. Because if I have an amount of life insurance equal to the value of the business, my family has received the full redemption value of that business. And then if they want, they can keep it running, or they can sell it for parts.
And they'd have the money to keep it running if they
That's right.
so choose.
That's correct. So that's in the case of death. I'll tell you a bigger issue, Kevin, is if somebody becomes incapacitated. Because I'll ask an owner of a business, let's use your example of somebody that has 15 employees. How long does the business last if you're not there day to day? Who makes payroll? Who makes decisions? Who buys things? Who sells things, right? And whose responsibility is it? And by the way, if you've got key people in your business, how long are they going to stay there if you're not engaged every day and they now have to, let's say, report to your surviving or your spouse who's not really engaged in the business because they have to worry about their own livelihood, their family could be adversely affected.
It's so important to business continuity and succession. And guys that I know, including my uncle I just spoke about that owned the gas station, did some things right, but then he stopped at a point, and all of the things you're explaining right now, all of the horror stories actually happened.
Right.
Who's going to run the business? Who's going to make payroll? How are we going to handle this moving forward? And it does become complicated. So I think it's absolutely imperative that people, talk to people like yourselves, and you get them in front of the right people to help flesh that entire plan out so that they know how to execute it and someone else knows how to execute it, and that all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. Before we continue with this, I do want to ask you a little bit about some employee benefit planning that I know you guys can do because you've done it for us with the LTC, LTD, and things that we currently offer the CAM membership through MassMutual. So we can talk about that. Tim, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah. So
any questions?
When it comes to business succession planning, what are the different types of buy-sell arrangements, and which ones have certain advantages? Are there ones that you think are better for certain businesses or situations?
That's a good question, Tim. So first of all, I want to distinguish what we actually do for a living, which is we're in the life insurance and investment business as part of a planning process. So we're at the facilitation end. A lot of what we've talked about, we also get engaged with an attorney that drafts the wills and trusts, and an accountant that really understands the financial well-being of the business. So getting to a buy-sell agreement, there's two types, generally speaking, that you're going to use. Number one is what's called the cross-purchase agreement. Let's say that you and I are the only two stockholders of the business. And let's say for our example that it's a 50-50 split. It's a $2 million business. I have a $1 million interest. You have a $1 million interest. So we can set up what's called a cross-purchase agreement in the case of death. So I buy a $1 million policy on you. I'm the owner. You're the insured. I'm the beneficiary. At your death, I'd receive the proceeds. I'd take the $1 million proceeds. I'd pass it on to your surviving spouse. She would then, in fact, give me that 50% ownership of stock. Now I own a $2 million business. Now, the great thing about that is I've paid $1 million for your interest. So, in terms, if I sell the business down the road, I have a step up in what's called the cost basis, and I'll pay a lot less in capital gains. I'm not going to get too far into the weeds with that.
Yeah, because we can go on into that for some time.
Right. So that's one option. Stock redemption is another. Let's say that everything's going to be redeemed by the corporation, and if I'm still the surviving stockholder, the company's going to be the owner. You're going to be the insured, and the company's going to be the primary beneficiary. It's redeemed by the company. Problem in some cases, especially with the C corporation, is now that $1 million is inside a corporation. Albeit we can use to redeem it, but there could be some tax consequences trying to get it back out. So the first one that we talked about, the cross purchase, is a lot of times a lot cleaner. But stock redemption plans are used quite a bit, especially when there's multiple owners of the business.
Excellent advice. Let's transition quickly, Brian, because we're getting a little short on time. But I want to talk about some of the things that MassMutual offers for the CAM membership, and one of them is what I consider an employee benefit. We have it for our employees, which is life insurance policies on our employees. I think there's also LTC and LTD factored into that, and you guys have a group program that you're able to put together for business owners for their employees, and it's a great retention tool. It's a great employee benefit. I think CAM, we pay 100% of that benefit for our employees, and I know that other employers can do that, or they can have the employees chip in a portion of it. But explain what that is. Give us a little detail on that, if you don't mind.
Sure. Well, let's start out with the premise. I always talk to the owner of the business about why you're providing benefits. Do you want them yourself? Is it a mechanism for you to transfer wealth from the business to yourself on a tax-efficient basis, or are you trying to attract and retain employees?
Very important today.
Yeah, most of the time they're trying to attract and retain an employee population. So part of what we want to do is talk to them about how it's going to be designed. How do you maximize the value, whether it's health insurance, disability insurance, life insurance, dental insurance, vision, which we would call health and welfare benefits. Mm-hmm. Well, all of those you have to be careful, because over 20 employees, I think, or 25, you have to comply with ERISA, HIPAA, COBRA, and now ACA, the Affordable Care Act. So I have to pay attention. The owner's always the plan trustee, right? So they're going to be responsible for making sure they comply with the law. So you need a good partner. Mm-hmm. But most of those products can fall into really probably 3 or 4 different categories. One would be just the health and welfare. Those are all those products that are, that I just mentioned. Then you can get into qualified and non-qualified plans. Qualified plans are like a 401k plan.
Sure.
And the reason they're qualified is they have to qualify under Section 401k of the Internal Revenue Code. Mm-hmm. So there's some law around it. Non-qualified means I can pick and choose, and I usually do it for a couple things. I can call it executive comp. I can call it deferred comp. But really what I'm trying to do is probably put golden handcuffs on my key people so that I don't lose them. Then I can get into things like voluntary benefits. Now what I'm doing is I'm providing benefits to my employees. They can pick and choose. Mm-hmm. It's going to be an employee contribution, but they get some great value because they couldn't do this stuff on their own, but because the employer brought it in, they get the benefit of being part of a larger group. Does that make sense?
It does, and we're touching on a lot of areas here, but that's a great thing in my mind about MassMutual Great Lakes. You have the ability to handle a lot of those options, or a variety of things for the owner of the business, or for the business itself, and even for their employees. And I think that's the beauty of what MassMutual brings to the table. So, we're getting a little short on time, and what I like to do at the end of each episode is ask our interviewee if they have any final words of wisdom for the listening CAM membership out there.
Well, first of all, I'd like to tell you that I'm not in your shoes. It's fascinating to me how little I know about the aspects of the construction industry, even relative to my own home. I'm a very good laborer. I'm a terrible specialist. So I use a lot of people in the construction industry to help me with things I don't know. And I would tell you, on the flip side of that, it's the same thing in our business. I recognize that you folks stay really busy at what you do, 60 hours a week. And the stuff sometimes that we do doesn't seem important until we get to a point of actually asking you some facts. So by summing it up, Kevin, I would tell you, everybody that I look at, I start by gathering information. What do they want to accomplish? This is their asset, it's not mine. Mm-hmm. And one size doesn't fit everybody. So we're trying to really get some information. We're trying to disturb them into thinking, what if? Nobody ever thinks they're going to die. And I went out to see a business owner one time. I was on my way out to Brighton from Novi, and I ran across a sign that said 900 and some odd people had died year to date, and it was like December. And of course the fellow said, well, I'm not going to die for another 30 years. And I said, let me ask you a question. Do you drive on the highway at all? And he said, yeah. I said, so do I. I said, matter of fact, I was on it today. I said, there are 928 people that have died year to date in Michigan. I said, how many of those people woke up that day, intentionally got in their car and thought, this is going to be the last day of my life? Do you think they would have gotten in their car and gotten on the road? I don't know about you, but I wouldn't have.
Sure.
So I'd say that's the type of things we try and have people think about, because if you put all your ducks in order, in a row, you're going to be far better off. You're going to be better off. Your family's going to be better off. And now you're going to maximize the value of your business and minimize taxes.
Well, that's that sinks in. I think everybody in our listening audience can understand that for sure. Brian, if somebody wants to reach out to you or reach out to MassMutual Great Lakes, how do they do that? Do they go to your website, or do you have a phone number you can give out, or what would you like to give out? Of course, they can call us here at the office, and I can get in touch with Brian as well.
Yeah, my cell phone number is 248-225-2446. You can also email me at B as in Brian, Van Riper. That's V as in Victor, A-N as in Nancy, R as in Robert, I, P as in Peter, E, R as in Robert, at financialguide.com.
Perfect. And I know that in a lot of the literature that we pump out here at CAM, MassMutual is mentioned, so they can always find you that way as well.
Sure.
Well, Brian, on behalf of all of us at CAM, myself, our producer, Tim Andrews, we want to thank you for being a part of CAM's Building Michigan podcast today.
Kevin, thank you so much for having me. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to Building Michigan, the official podcast of the Construction Association of Michigan, hosted by Kevin Koehler, CAM President. We appreciate you spending a part of your day with us. If you have a second, please share our podcast with industry colleagues, leave us a review, and connect with us at www.buildwithcam.com. That's all for now. Be sure to subscribe to Building Michigan wherever you get your podcasts, and join us for the next episode.
Today's episode of CAM's Building Michigan podcast is sponsored by Priority Health, endorsed health insurance carrier for CAM members.
So right now, we've all been feeling lots of shifts in our lives. We've gone from crazy busy schedules to way more time with our loved ones, from commuting to the office to working from our couches. And that's okay, because Priority Health is always ready to shift right there with you. So whether you're experiencing a shift in employment or you're prepping for a new member of the family to arrive, Priority Health has you covered. Priorities shift, so maybe it's time your health insurance company did too. Find your plan at PriorityHealth.com.
It's that time of year. Time to review your workers' compensation plan and shift to coverage that pays you back. CamComp, part of the Construction Association of Michigan, is the state's leading self-insured group designed for the construction industry. The safer your employees, the more money you get back. The average payback to members is 45% of their premium, a very smart investment.
Find out how safety pays. For more information, please contact Michelle Mage at mmage@camcomp.net.
The Construction Association of Michigan, CAM, has been helping commercial and industrial contractors and suppliers grow since 1885. They provide contractors leadership through aggressive lobbying, construction project reporting, safety and education training, industry promotion, insurance, and banking. Are you an owner, developer, or buyer of construction services? Hire a CAM member to get your project done on time and under budget. They are one industry, one resource, one CAM. Check them out at buildwithcam.com.